Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome again. It's good to see you all here. It's been far too long. Today, we are going to be discussing something which I think draws upon many of the themes that I've discussed in the last year or so, and maybe draws together many of the themes. Maybe it's been building towards this topic, which is that of the ideal king, particularly within English history and tradition. Now, I appreciate that is a massive topic, and this talk is not going to be exhaustive. There's going to be elements which you might know about that you think are important that I won't have time to necessarily discuss. But please do put them in the comments, and I hope we can build an insightful view as to what it is that makes the idea of kingship so powerful. The kind of motivation behind this talk, in part, was the fact that I think many of us instinctively know that a monarch or a king is different from a president or a prime minister or some kind of modern day ruler. And I don't think the difference is just that the president is elected, whereas a king typically is descended from the former king, the former sovereign, or that they won their royalty through might and force. There seems to be some uh, transcendental or legendary aspect which is infused with the idea of kingship. It's bound up with stories that we all know from childhood, and in turn, it seems connected with the very land and architecture which many of us, especially those who live in Britain, walk past and live in every day. And so I wanted to kind of explore this idea. What is it that really draws us? What's magnetic about the king as an idea? Why do we want to pledge ourselves to this individual? Because many Republicans, I think, have some reasonable arguments in this regard. We know that the monarch is a human being, and many of them have been very flawed human beings. Often they use their power in tyrannical ways for their own gain, for their own self interest. They will arbitrarily uh, take property, take away freedoms, and serve themselves. Not too different from a president, but they lack they would argue, the accountability of the electorate. So, what is it then that draws us? Why do we prefer it, or why do we want to pledge ourselves to a king in a way that we never would to a president? But there's also something else which drew me to this topic, and it's the current state of the United Kingdom. And we could spend a whole number of streams on that topic alone. But I want to position it with two stories that have recently been in the news here and have really made me question what is at the heart of this country now. So if we look at the first one, let me bring it up. So this was published on the BBC just a short time ago. I think it was last week. The other newspapers also published this story as well. Small shops call for aid to tackle brazen shoplifters. A convenience store owner says he witnesses up to 9 shoplifting incidents a day, with criminals who are more brazen and aggressive. He goes on to say that, the article says that several shopkeepers, thousands around the country, are experiencing this. Not just small, but also your big shops, your Greggs, your Tesco, etc., that people will just go in, take what they want, and leave. And often they're doing this. It's almost a delivery service. People will order what they want from these shops to these thieves, and they'll just go and steal it and sell it to them. This comes in the light of, actually, there was a study recently which suggested that shoplifting in the last year or two has radically spiked. In my county, Northumberland, it's gone up by 60%. 60%. Now, this is a small county. There's only about 5 million people in this county or so, and it's very spread out. It's a huge piece of land. So it's not like there's lots of cities here or something. But all these thefts are increasing. And the shopkeepers basically say, well, the police never show up. They're not they report the thefts. They tell them, look, we're being robbed, or there's robbers who have just come. And the police say, well, we don't have time to deal with it. And if we go further down this article, the police, the Metropolitan Police that deal with London, which have been in the news for many other reasons recently, they said that it would not be realistic for the force to respond to every case of shoplifting because of demand, but that officers would be dispatched where appropriate. Now, of course, where appropriate, well, most of the time, uh, they don't turn up. So it begs the question, when would it be appropriate for them to turn up? And it's okay for the multinational corporations, for the large businesses which can afford security guards, but small businesses can't. And it's becoming unsustainable for them. They're making such a loss on their goods being stolen every day. Their staff are feeling so intimidated by these thugs who, these days, you don't know if you're going to get stabbed or killed by one of these people. So it's going to drive small businesses out of existence. And what was quite shocking to me is that whilst we've seen these stories in the United States, particularly in places like Detroit, I think areas of Los Angeles and so on, that there are these like epidemics of thievery and looting. For it to happen in the United Kingdom, which is by contrast a quite gentle country, we don't have guns here. The population can't get guns. We are in many ways defenseless, but there's a high level of trust. That's being violated here. And the people who are meant to protect us, the police force, are not doing that. So lawlessness, anarchy, is breaking out in this country, in many cities, and nothing's being done about it. And as we've seen in America, the longer this goes on, businesses leave those areas. They become, what do they call them, food deserts, where there's no shops supplying food to these people. So it just escalates and escalates and becomes worse and worse. It's a vicious cycle. So that's starting to happen here. So you could say that the government is allowing wickedness to spread in at a very fundamental level in the United Kingdom, on top of all the other things. Because if you don't get this right, the whole order disappears in an area, and it's spreading across cities. So that was one story. So that's the anarchy aspect, we might say, that's in the UK now. But let's look at the other side, what we might call the tyrannical aspect. And let's see. Yes, I think many of you will know this story already. Police arrest autistic teenager who said officer looks like her lesbian nana. Mother says 16-year-old was dragged away screaming after being arrested on suspicion of homophobia. Police officer who arrest a teenager after she said a female officer looked like a lesbian nana have been accused of a callous overreaction. Footage posted online showed the 16-year-old being detained by 7 officers at a home in Leeds at around 1 a.m. on Monday. Officers had driven the teenager home after her family told police she was intoxicated in the city centre. She allegedly made the comment upon her return and was then dragged away screaming after being accused of homophobia by the force. So, and many of us will have seen the videos on Twitter or wherever, and it is what it describes. It's a 16-year-old girl who makes a comment which isn't particularly offensive. The officer in question took it as offensive. This lady here, and she seems to be the commanding officer. She orders her 7 policemen, and these big guys, dragging this 16-year-old out of the house in the middle of the night down the street to be taken to the police station for something which isn't a crime. It's not against the law. It doesn't constitute a hate crime. It's just a hate incident. Now, this, we expect this kind of story these days because the governments and corporations and charities are all concerned with eradicating bigotry and prejudice and so on as they see it. But the question is, well, okay, we expect this, but put it in contrast to the other story. We're told by a police force that they can't turn up for burglaries happening every day in a store, the intimidation of employees and so on. But we can get 7 burly policemen to drag a 16-year-old into the police station. Should they not be going out to stop these thefts? Is this more important? Is this what they spend their time on? And when it's not a criminal incident? So you have this anarchy and tyranny in the United Kingdom today. This oppressive use of the police and an absence where they should be. And so this got me thinking about, okay, well, what ought to be their role? What is the place of the sovereign of the state if it's not this? Because we all sense there's something wrong here. What is it? Why does it feel wrong? That's what I want to get to. So with that in mind, let's then turn to the kind of third setup piece here, which is the coronation of Charles III. It happened, not too long ago, seen by millions of people around the world. And there were some specific duties laid upon Charles within that ceremony, which directly relate to what we're talking about today, to these very situations that I've just raised. And I'm going to play the clip now. It's a couple of minutes long. It has this beautiful Greek chanting in the background of Psalm 72, which is paraphrased in parts by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, as he speaks to Charles III. So I'm going to play that now.
Receive this kingly sword. May it be to you and to all who witness these things a sign and symbol not of judgment, but of justice, not of might, but of mercy. With this sword, do justice, stop the growth of iniquity, protect the holy church of God and all people of goodwill, help and defend widows and orphans, restore the things that are gone to decay, maintain the things that are restored, punish and reform what is amiss, and confirm what is in good order, that doing these things you may be glorious in all virtue, and so faithfully serve our Lord Jesus Christ in this life, that you may reign forever with him in the life which is to come. Amen.
So we had there several ideas being that Charles was being committed to, certain duties that he was being called upon to perform as the king. And I suppose his government, his ministers underneath him, are also meant to have that too, to follow this duty. Fundamentally, it is the administration of justice. It is the rooting out of iniquity, the maintaining of those things which are good, supporting the welfare of those who are, the weakest in society, protecting them, I suppose, from the oppressor, from the tyrant, and so on. And this was his duty to perform. It doesn't seem like that's being done, does it, with the stories we've just read about? But this notion of justice, I think, when we look at the legends of England, is at the very heart of what it means to be the righteous king. It is integral to who they are. And let us start with King Arthur. Arthur, who is the embodiment of that ideal in so many ways and has been constantly drawn back to by various English kings. They've modeled themselves upon him. I think of Edward III, and though he did not eventually have the Round Table itself, he forms the Order of the Garter. They fight for chivalry and so on under the banner of St. George. You have Henry II, who very much ties himself to King Arthur when he overcomes the anarchy and lawlessness which dominates England of that time, re-establishing the royal justice, centralizing justice under him so it removes the arbitrariness of it, and so on. So let's just look at a couple of passages from Tennyson's Idylls of the King. I think Tennyson's a good kind of synthesis of many of the strands within the Arthurian legend, and the prose is quite, or the verse is good for us as a modern audience. And I want to kind of turn to a short section which comes near the beginning of the collection of poems. This follows very shortly after Arthur has claimed kingship over England. He has been chosen, as it were. The Lady of the Lake has given him Excalibur. He has drawn the sword from the stone, and then leading many knights and working with certain barons, he has overthrown the heathen horde, the Germanic tribes which have invaded at that point in the story. He has overthrown those barons who would rebel against him, and he has established his kingdom. And he is sitting in court, presiding over court. And many people are coming to him looking for justice. And so we pick it up, let's see, in one of these occasions, in the splendor of Camelot. Then came a widow, crying to the king, "A boon, Sir King! Thy father, Uther, reft from my dead lord a field with violence. For howsoever at first he proffered gold, yet for the field was pleasant in our eyes. We yielded not, and then he rest us of it, perforce, and left us neither gold nor field." Said Arthur, "Whether would ye, gold or field?" To whom the woman weeping, "Nay, my lord, the field was pleasant in my husband's eye." And Arthur, "Have thy pleasant field again, and thrice the gold for Uther's use thereof. According to the years, no boon is here, but justice, so thy say be proven true. Accursed, who from the wrongs his father did would shape himself aright." And while she passed, came yet another widow crying to him, "A boon, Sir King! Thine enemy, King, am I. With thine own hand thou slewest, my dear lord, a knight of Uther in the Barons' War, when Lot and many another rose and fought against thee, saying thou wert basely born. I held with these, and loath to ask thee aught. Yet lo, my husband's brother had my son thralled in his castle, and hath starved him dead, and standeth seized of that inheritance, which thou that slewest the sire hast left the son. So though I scarce can ask it thee for hate, grant me some knight to do the battle for me, kill the foul thief, and wreak for my son." Then strode a good knight forward, crying to him, "A boon, Sir King! I am her kinsman, I. Give me to right her wrong and slay the man. Then came Sir Kay, the seneschal, and cried, A boon, Sir King, e'en that thou grant her none, this railer that hath mocked thee in full hall, none, or the wholesome boon of give and gag. But Arthur, we sit king to help the wronged through all our realm. The woman loves her lord. Peace to thee, woman, with thy loathes and hates. The kings of old have doomed thee to the flames. Aurelius Emrys would have scourged thee dead, and Uther slit thy tongue. But get thee hence, lest that rough humour of the kings of old return upon me. Thou that art her kin, go likewise. Lay him low and slay him not, but bring him here, that I may judge the right, according to the justice of the king. Then, be he guilty, by that deathless king who lived and died for men, the man shall die. So we have here, I think, a very clear picture of Arthur's reign, that people will come to him with grievances, with injustices that have been done upon them, typically by someone more powerful than them, that's abusing that power, using it to take their property, to enthrall them, or to, rob and kill. Arthur's role is to protect people from such injustice, and it is to punish those who commit such injustice. And he doesn't do it in a way which is just for his friends. It's not just for his supporters. He says, and I'll repeat the line, we sit king to help the wronged through all our realm. This is an important idea. We'll come back to it. But the point here is that he seeks justice for all of his subjects, whether they supported him or are against him. He does what is right, regardless of the person in play. So he's ultimately absolutely committed to the rule of justice. And this is what almost sets him... If you read the rest of Tennyson's work here, Arthur, he's almost like this abstract idea brought to life. There's a non-human quality to him in a sense. He's not, and this is almost what brings Guinevere to commit adultery with Lancelot. She cannot love such a man because he's more than a man. He is the incarnation of justice in the land, and he wants that for all people. There's an impersonal, impartial aspect to him. Let's turn then to actually, there's another part in Arthur where I think this really comes out, and it is to do with the quest for the Holy Grail. And it's quite interesting how Tennyson portrays it, because the Grail's been discussed quite a bit within this sphere. There's been some good videos talking about how the quest for the Holy Grail can be seen as an initiation quest, or a version of the heroic journey, where a young man will go forth, find this object, overcoming great evil, attain the Grail, which is a symbol or an object connected with divinity. So they've ascended into this space. They've been initiated into it, and thus they attain to sacral kingship of some kind. They have achieved that which gives them the justification to be the ruler, let's say. But in Tennyson's portrayal, it isn't connected with kingship. The quest for the Grail is something which is almost in conflict with Arthur's reign. And this is so because Arthur is away. He is being called forth to deal with a band of thieves. And with some knights, he goes and crushes these bandits to make the country safe. And while he's away, in the great hall of Camelot, many of the knights are gathered. Lancelot, Percival, Galahad, many of them. And they have a vision. The Holy Grail appears before them. Or at least it appears before Sir Galahad. He sees the Holy Grail. The rest of them only see a blinding light, and they have to cover their eyes, so they do not actually see the Grail. When Arthur returns, or I should say before Arthur returns, they then vow to go on a quest to find the Holy Grail, particularly as many of them have not seen it. They feel this is a call to them, that they must give up where they are at the moment and go forward towards this higher calling, that from the divine itself, to go forth and find the Holy Grail. It has a stronger bond on them. It's a greater commitment than their loyalty to Arthur, we might say. So Arthur returns from his adventure. He's done justice and he's coming back to Camelot. And the knights tell him about their vision and the oaths they have made. And Arthur gives what might be seen as a surprising response to their oaths. He asks each of them whether they have seen the Grail. And of course, Galahad can say, yes, I have seen the Grail. But the rest say, no, they haven't. And he replies, well, Galahad, Galahad, for such as thou art is the vision, not for these, that is the other knights. Thy holy nun and thou have seen a sign, holier as none, my Percival than she, a sign to maim this order, which I made. But ye, that follow but the leader's bell. Taliesin is our fullest throat of song, and one hath sung and all the dumb will sing. Lancelot is Lancelot, and hath overborne 5 knights at once, and every younger knight unproven holds himself as Lancelot, till overborne by one he learns, and ye, what are ye? Galahads? No, nor Percivals, nay, but men, with strength and will to right the wronged, of power to lay the sudden heads of violence flat. Knights that in 12 great battles splashed and died, the strong white horse in his own heathen blood. But one hath seen, and all the blind will see. Go, since your vows are sacred, being made. Yet, for ye know the cries of all my realm pass through this hall. How often, O my knights, your places being vacant at my side, this chance of noble deeds will come and go unchallenged, while ye follow wandering fires lost in the quagmire. Many of you, yea, most, return no more. Ye think I show myself too dark a prophet. When the few return, it is only a small number. Galahad is the only one who finds the Grail in this version of the story. He is the only one able to ascend towards it. Only 3 others have a vision of the Grail. Percival, Lancelot, and Bors. They see it, but they do not get it. The rest, most of them are lost. They die on their quest, and a few will return. Arthur, when they return, says the following: And spake I not too truly, O my knights? Was I too dark a prophet when I said to those who went upon the holy quest that most of them would follow wandering fires, lost in the quagmire, lost to me and gone, and left me gazing at a barren board and a lean order, scarce returned a tithe, and out of those to whom the vision came, my greatest hardly will believe he saw. Another hath beheld it afar off, and leaving human wrongs to right themselves, cares but to pass into the silent life. And one hath had the vision face to face, and now his chair desires him here in vain, however they may crown him otherwhere. And some among you held that if the king had seen the sight, he would have sworn the vow. Not easily, seeing that the king must guard that which he rules, and is but as the hind to whom a space of land is given to plough. who may not wander from the allotted field before his work be done, but being done, let visions of the night or of the day come as they will. So there's a lot to unpack there. I think the key thing I want to get across here is Arthur is not he's not ecstatic about his knights seeing the Grail and vowing to go and follow it, primarily because he has a duty to justice. He has been chosen by God, by the divine powers or of the world, to administer this kingdom righteously. He keeps saying, to right the wrong that's being done in the land. And he can't do that by himself. He needs his knights, the knights of the Round Table. He will send them off on quests to investigate and administer justice on his behalf. When these knights vow to follow the Holy Grail, to find the Holy Grail, they are abandoning that purpose of the sovereign. They're making it harder for him to enact justice in the country. And by the end, he's quite clear. It's left them with a lean order. And not only have several died or not returned, you have Galahad, who has attained the Holy Grail. He's ascended into heaven. He's not coming back. While Percival, he has chosen to become a monk. He's leaving human wrongs to right themselves, cares but to pass into the silent life. So this version almost puts the absolute pursuit of communion with God, which might be represented by the monastery, as being an alternate path, and from that of administering justice. And in this case, Arthur's main point is actually, most of you weren't called to that. You were called to serve in a political function, the normal way of serving God, which is to administer justice. Only a few, Galahad, were actually called to this, because he alone saw the Grail. So again, justice rings as the key idea for Arthur. It's a very earthly, maybe that's the wrong way. He serves God in society. He's not like the monk, like Percival. The idea of justice being associated with kingship also finds expression in the legend of Robin Hood. In fact, I think it's the fundamental dynamic at the heart of the story. Many will try to portray Robin Hood as a sort of communist of some kind. I think this comes from the little slogan, he robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. It sounds like he's all about economic redistribution. It's about the spreading out of material goods. And the real problem with the Sheriff of Nottingham is he's rich, right? That's how it's sort of framed. But this couldn't be further from the legends. There's like a grain of truth in it, but it misses out the rich context, which informs why Robin Hood is robbing the rich in the first place. And again, I want to read a couple of passages from a book that we've actually looked at on the channel, Roger Lancelyn Green's The Adventures of Robin Hood, which is a brilliant synthesis of many of the medieval and Victorian Robin Hood stories into one volume, into a kind of continuous narrative. Lancelyn Green was actually a student of C.S. Lewis's, incidentally, so you've got a connection with the Inklings here as well. And this first speech comes from the very beginning of Robin Hood, as it were. At this point, Prince John is the regent, because King Richard is absent from the country. He's been on crusade. He's been taken captive by the French. And so England is being governed by Prince John, who is a tyrannical leader. He and his supporters, like the Sheriff of Nottingham, the bureaucrats of various kinds, are using their power in arbitrary ways. They punish those who are against them, even if they they're loyal to the king or whatnot. They'll punish their opponents. They'll take their money, their lands, their property, their titles for themselves. And, if they just want them, it doesn't matter if they're friend or foe, they'll just take them because they have the power to do so. And this has happened to the character of Robin Hood, the Earl of Huntingdon, Locksley. Prince John has seized his lands, taken his goods, taken his title, and declared him an outlaw. That means that he is punishable by death, by hanging as a common thief. And so Robin has managed to escape the clutches of Prince John, and he is met with many of his followers in Sherwood Forest. And that is where we take up this speech of Robin's, if I can find the right page. So yes. My friends, what I feared has befallen me. You all heard the mandate of outlawry read against me, and some of you may have incurred danger of the same by withstanding those men sent against me under Sir Guy of Gisborne. Well now, you may choose for yourselves. I set you all free from my service. But indeed, as I am an outlaw, that sets you free whether I will or not. If you did not all know it already, you know now that I am that Robin Hood who, for several years now, has befriended all such as suffer under the cruelty and unjustness of lords, barons, bishops, abbots, and sheriffs. I have already a band of men sworn to follow me, who await me in the green wood. We are all comrades and brothers, though me they have chosen to be their leader and their king. Not because I am by right an earl, not merely because I have the gift of a steady hand and a clear eye so can shoot an arrow further and straighter than most men, but because one must rule and I come of a race of rulers. I am no more Robert Fitzooth, Earl of Huntingdon, but the plain yeoman of Locksley whom men call Robin Hood. But my friends in Sherwood have chosen me king, and a king in Sherwood I shall be. My first care for my followers, but our first care for justice and mercy and the love of God. And in this I hold that we commit no treason. When Richard comes home from the crusade, this reign of terror and of evil against which I fight will end. Cruel, lawless John will oppress us no longer, nor his friends and followers use us without right or justice, as slaves and not as free men. Later, Hood addresses his assembled followers once more, and he kind of expands on some of the themes we've just heard. We must take the king's deer, since we must eat to live. I should explain that hunting the king's deer was punishable by death, because you were essentially robbing the king. So you had various rangers in medieval England, these woodsmen who would guard the forest from poachers and thieves and so on. But when the king returns, I myself will beg pardon at his feet for this trespass. And now you shall all swear the oath which I swear with you, and all seeking to join us must swear also. We declare war upon all of those thieves, robbers, extortioners, and men of evil whom we find among the nobles, the clergy, and burgesses of town. In particular, those who follow or accompany Prince John, false abbots, monks, bishops, and archbishops, whom we will beat and bind like sheaves of corn, so that they may yield the golden grain of their robberies. The abbots of St. Mary's, Doncaster, and Fountains shall we seek for in particular, and I think we shall keep within our oath, if we make it our especial care, to harry and persecute the false sheriff of Nottingham, who so wickedly abuses his power to please and satisfy his master, Prince John. Now, my friends, we do not take from these and their kind to enrich ourselves. We take for the general good, and it shall be as much our duty to seek out the poor, the needy, the widow, the orphan, and all those who have suffered or are suffering wrong, and minister to their wants in so far as we can. So we can see that there's a couple of things here. First, the motivation of Robin Hood is not vengeance, and it's not about him being the enemy of the Sheriff of Nottingham or Prince John. It's not as if he wants to take over from these figures in a political struggle. What motivates him primarily is, again, justice. He wants to see their cruelty, their oppression overturned. He's fighting back against it. He's trying to protect those who cannot fight. And he wants to retake what has been wrongfully taken from innocent people and restore it to them. So it's restitution. It is it's righting the wrong. So when he robs from the rich to give to the poor, there's a caveat. It is the rich which have wrongfully taken what they have from these poor innocent people. They're taking back what they've wrongfully taken and restoring it to its rightful owners, as well as generally caring for the common good. This is in the absence of King Richard. This situation has occurred. And there's a kind of interesting implication here that we see throughout kind of storytelling and, for example, in Shakespeare. When the rightful king is absent, lawlessness reigns. Anarchy is allowed to unfold. Now, why is that? Well, it's because the king is the one who upholds justice within the land. The ideal king is meant to be that. So when the rightful king is not there, you remove that power, that force, which is able to maintain order, peace, suppress tyranny and iniquity and so on. And so it allows for that to flourish. So with the absence of the king, this takes place. And so Robin is very much in his own way trying to fill in for the king's role. While the king's absent, he and his merry men are going to be the administrators of justice, particularly as those who are meant to do so, the judges, the sheriffs, and so on, are abusing their power, using the law in unjust ways. So, and Hood is quite clear about this, because remember, when the king returns, he's pledging loyalty to the king, and he's only doing this as long as the king's away. So there's a very strong belief that when the king returns, justice will be reinstated within the land, and he'll no longer have to be this outlaw in Sherwood Forest, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor. So again, it's very much centered on this notion of justice, or the absence of justice, which leads to the emergence of such a figure. It is the key principle which allows for him to emerge. So he's not some kind of communist, and he's not just a thief. He's trying to cling on to what's left of justice and maintain it in the hard times, in the dark times, amidst the ruins. We might just make a final kind of connection here, which I think is kind of interesting, before we move on to Alfred the Great, to kind of expand our thoughts here. Many of you will have seen the film Excalibur, which is a great film. It tells the story of King Arthur in quite a fun and engaging way. And one of the key kind of lines in the film is that the king and the land are one. There's a unity between the person of the king and the state of the realm. And this often isn't just reflected on a social level, so the order or anarchy which is within a society, but it's also reflected in the environment itself. We see this particularly in something like The Lord of the Rings. The evil characters, Sauron, Saruman, they preside over kingdoms which decimate the natural world. One of the key story arcs is that Saruman in Isengard sends his orcs, his little goblins, to cut down trees from Fangorn Forest, which borders his realm, and they're going to use these trees as fuel for building their war machine. This angers the tree shepherds, the Ents, these kind of walking tree creatures, who are meant to guard the forest, and they retaliate, essentially destroying Saruman's power. It's a great example of nature kind of punching back against the abuse of it. But by contrast, when the good king is in power, when the rightful sovereign is there, it allows for the land to flourish. And perhaps in The Lord of the Rings, a good example would be a character like Sam, who becomes the mayor of the Shire in due course. Well, he's a gardener, and he goes about healing the natural or the environment of the Shire, which has been decimated by Saruman's ruffians. They've been cutting down trees and so on. He replants the trees, and in fact, these are trees from the Elven Kingdom of Lothlorien, so they're even more beautiful and more majestic and wonderful than there has been before. Interestingly, George is a variant of a word that means gardener. And so there's this idea, and I think it's very integral to the English, our love of gardening, of flowers and so on. It's about, on the one hand, moderating the wildness of nature, but also allowing it to flourish through the imposition of order. The good king, the knight, allows for that to happen, whereas the bad king, or the absence of a king, damages the land. And people will see this as metaphorical, but I actually think it's intrinsically linked, because why is the bad ruler bad? Well, they pursue their own self-interest, and they extort for what is not rightfully theirs from their subjects. And by extension, they're going to do the same to the natural world. Somebody like Saruman has a rapacious desire for power, and he uses the forest he enslaves the forest essentially for his own purposes. It's not hard to imagine that when we have such rulers who are not interested in justice, who are only concerned with their projects, with their own well-being, and so on and so forth, that it doesn't just impact their subjects, but also the land which is actually under their feet. Perhaps this can be seen in our own day with the horrible abuse of trees and so on, cut down for projects like high-speed rail networks, which bring very little benefit to, it's like a 10, 20-minute faster train for the lives of these trees. Or there was an example of in Oxfordshire, they're going to cut down orchards to build roads to allow for better public transport, which will, in theory, help them reduce their carbon emissions in the city. You couldn't make it up. We're going to cut down trees to save the environment. It's this kind of dark thinking, which I think is reflective of a tyrannical ruler, or the absence of a just ruler. So we've got kind of a broad picture of what the ideal king is meant to uphold, justice. But I think we can probe this a little bit further and draw out some key ideas and connect it with history and its very strong biblical roots. There may be others that you could draw on, and please put them in the chat if you think of any, but you'll see why I'm drawing this connection. Because it all really comes together in Alfred the Great. Now, Alfred was probably the most famous Anglo-Saxon figure that we know today. He was the king of West Sussex. Is that right? West Essex. Oh, let me get this right. This is embarrassing. King of Wessex. King of Wessex. So King of Wessex, which is the south of England. And he was a young king at the time when the Viking great heathen horde landed in England. And it just steamrolled so many of the Saxon kingdoms. The Vikings already had a lot of land in England, but it helped them conquer even further. You had the solidification of Northumberland, Mercia fell, and then Wessex itself was taken by surprise, and Alfred and his kind of closest family and allies had to flee and were in the wilderness for several months. But eventually, Alfred was able to overthrow the heathen horde, and in time, he achieved kind of two things which are connected. He united the Saxon kingdoms under himself. They sought him insofar as he could protect them from the Vikings, thereby becoming the first king of the English, of an English people or nation. And he was able to take back many of the lands that the Vikings had taken, creating a border between the English under Alfred and those who were underneath him, and the Danelaw. The Danelaw was on the east, the English were in the west, roughly speaking. So he achieved this, and he as part of his kind of so he becomes the first king of England. He is, as it were, and one of his great contributions is the development of law. In fact, you might think, well, because he has become the king of all these different groups, which may have had their own legal codes before, having a unified law system for the formation of his people would be quite important. It gives them a continuity, a unity. It identifies the boundaries of that people group compared to another and includes them all within it under him. And so he produced what's called the Doom Book. Doom being judgment, etc. And this was produced maybe around 886 AD. It's not exactly clear, but it's around that time. The Doom Book begins with the Ten Commandments. It then has 2 chapters of the Book of Exodus, which are not given verbatim. They are paraphrased. There's some bits pulled out which aren't really relevant to Anglo-Saxons. There's changes of some phrases in certain ways to avoid perhaps the kind of capital punishment associated with certain crimes and so on. But in general, there's an importation of 2 passages from the Bible into the beginning of here. So you have that from Exodus, so the Mosaic law, the law given by God to Moses for the people of Israel. This is the basis for then what Alfred's going to produce later. He then references the Sermon on the Mount as being maintaining continuity with the Mosaic law rather than abandoning it, before talking about the church and its councils and how it took on the principles of Moses' law and applied them applied them to redress the wrongs in society. And so Alfred is going to do the same for the Anglo-Saxons. He's going to take the principles of the Ten Commandments, of Mosaic law, and apply them to an Anglo-Saxon context. And he's going to do this in an interesting way because he actually draws upon 3 other Saxon codes by 3 Saxon English kings, Christian kings, and he's going to take various laws from each, amend them slightly, and so on, in accordance with the principles in the Bible, to produce a unified legal system for England. And those 3 English kings or Saxon kings were Ethelbert of Kent, Ine of Wessex, and Offa of Mercia. So this is quite good because you've just united all of these people under you. You're incorporating their legal traditions into your own, combining them, amalgamating them into something which is a new legal system for a new ethnogenesis of the English. So it's a really clever idea to do it in that way. We'll come to the actual content or the principles at play in a short moment, but I want to draw our attention to maybe two aspects of this, which are quite important for understanding kingship. The first is that it is divinely mandated. It's not something which Alfred is framing as having been a right of conquest. It's not something which is purely human origin or justification. It's not justified by the will of the people. It's not justified by even being voted by in the Witten for that individual to be the king, which happened in Mercia, for example. It's justified because it fulfills a role which has been appointed by God. And we can see this in the idea that by placing the Mosaic law as the foundation for English law, you have this idea that this is a law or a set of codes, a way of life which has been given by God. It's for all human beings to live by. This is divinely mandated. And so the king is the one who upholds God's law within society. He keeps the community in obedience to the divine and to what the divine has intended for nature. So it could be also framed as the laws of nature. And I noticed Black Horse mentioned in the chat already. This very much concurs with what the Apostle Paul says in Romans 13. He writes the following: "Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he, the ruler, is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil." So there is this clear sense, and I think Alfred would have been fully aware of this because he was a very committed Christian. From a very young age, he'd gone on pilgrimage to Rome, and as a king, he cultivated the church, translated theological texts, was clearly a very pious man. This is reflected in his own preference for placing Christianity at the heart of his legal system. But he sees himself as being chosen by God to execute justice within the kingdom, to restrain iniquity, to punish wrongdoing, to make the wrong right. Tied in with that, though, and so I should say then, so if we're thinking about kingship in general, well, look at Arthur, it's the same idea. He is divinely chosen by forces beyond human beings. The Lady of the Lake gives him the sword of Excalibur, a sign of his right to kingship. He draws the sword from the stone, which it had been prophesied only he, chosen by God, could do. So he is divinely chosen for that purpose. We heard in the coronation ceremony that God has placed these charges upon Charles III to execute justice within this country. It's divinely chosen. It's something beyond us that's doing this. You're obligated to something higher than human opinion, human tradition, and so on. The king upholds God's law within the realm. At the same time, though, and this is important, the king isn't an innovator in that sense. He is one that upholds or is custodian of a tradition. We see this in the fact that Alfred amalgamates 3 law codes from prior Saxon kings and doesn't introduce many laws of his own making. He might attenuate a law to bring it into conformity, to make it applicable to the current context. But generally speaking, he's inheriting a tradition, and only reworking it for the current moment. He's not creating his own constitution out of the ether. He's not coming with a philosophical program which overturns everything that's gone before and brings it into accordance with his rationality, with his rational program. This is very much at the heart of, what used to be at the heart of English culture and its legal tradition. We don't have a written constitution like the United States of America that starts everything at ground zero. It's built up over time. There are customs, there are traditions, ways of doing things which have developed, and through the trial and error, through the collective wisdom of our institutions, of our people, and so on. So the king is meant to maintain those good things and carry out those good things. So it's quite different from the modern politician who promises to do all these new and novel things. It's quite different from how many of us see today, where we come with an ideology and think, well, we want to bring this ideology to bear within society. The king, what's striking about something like King Arthur is you don't really get a sense of political philosophy of King Arthur. He's just interested in upholding justice, God's law within the kingdom. He's interested in maintaining what's there already and causing it to flourish and grow. It's a very different way of approaching being a ruler. So that's another interesting aspect of the ideal of English kingship. It's not a role which demands a political program, but rather the execution of justice, the maintaining of a just tradition, supporting those institutions which deliver that. It's almost beyond politics in a sense. At least the ideal is removed from that political fray. This maybe brings us to the third point here, the actual content of Alfred's Doom book, which is just the best title for a legal code. We should definitely bring that back. And in the kind of codes, there's a certain principle at play that he doesn't spell out himself, but it is present in his quotations from Exodus. And let me see if I can bring it up on the screen. Make sure I've got the right page. I'll put a link in the chat to the actual Doom book in due course. So let's see. You can find it on Google. And it says here, so number 43, judge thou very evenly. Judge thou not one doom to the rich, another to the poor, nor one to thy friend, another to thy foe. Judge thou. Let's read that again. Judge thou very evenly. Judge thou not one doom to the rich, another to the poor, nor one to thy friend, another to thy foe. Judge thou. And Alfred will further down make a very similar comment, which I think helps to expand what he's saying here. So if we go down for, I've gone too far. You can see they've got the Old English here as well, which is just fantastic. Oh, here we go. So he's just spoken about the church and so Jesus upholding this principle from the Mosaic law, the church also. Then he writes the following. From this one doom, a man may remember that he judge everyone righteously. He need heed no other doom book. Let him remember that he adjudged to no man that which he would not that he should adjudge to him, if he sought judgment against him. So there is this very clear idea within the Doom Book of impartiality, that the law applies to everybody equally. Everybody's equal before the law. It's not that the rich should get one form of treatment and the poor another. It's not that you should show favor to your friends and punishment to your enemies, which is, goes against what many people are saying today. Rather, regardless of who is to be judged, they are to be judged the same as anybody else by the laws of the land. Now, Alfred is referencing various biblical, or drawing upon biblical verses here, and there's very many within the Bible. One of the key passages, for example, would be in the letter of James. Others, Leviticus, Exodus, and Deuteronomy. But just for the James one, it kind of brings these together, and he writes the following. Let me see if I can get a good version here. Yeah, that'll do. So he's writing to a church, and he says, "My brethren, do not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with partiality. For if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings and fine apparel, and there should also come in a poor man in filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes, and say to him, 'You sit here in a good place,' and say to the poor man, 'You stand there,' or 'Sit here at my footstool,' have you not shown partiality among yourselves, and become judges with evil thoughts? You have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts? Do they not blaspheme the noble name by which you are called? If you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, 'You shall love your neighbor as yourself,' you do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors." So there is this idea here that God's law, the Mosaic law, the law that's given to Moses, which is then kind of expanded on with Christ, is impartial, and that those who follow Christ are meant to be impartial in the way that they treat other people. They are meant to do what is right, regardless of who it is for. Let me stop sharing that. So, when it comes to the application of justice, we saw this with King Arthur. One of his enemies came to him looking for justice, that her son had been taken as a slave by his uncle, and she asked Arthur to send one of his knights to right that wrong. Now, many rulers would see, well, this is an enemy of mine. She supported those who were against me, and maybe by giving her justice, I am strengthening my enemy because I'm letting the sun loose again. But beyond that, why should I help her? Shouldn't I not humiliate her as my enemy? Should I not wreak vengeance upon her? That is the attitude of Sir Kay. But Arthur says, no, I am here to do justice, and justice is impartial. So there is this very important idea in Alfred reflected in Arthur. The root of this, though, isn't just because it's a nice thing to do. It's metaphysical. It's because God is impartial. And we see this, for example, in James. He writes that, let me see if I can find the right verse. Well, I can't see it while I'm reading it now. But in the book of Deuteronomy, it reads, "For the Lord your God is the God of gods and the Lord of lords, a great God, a mighty and a terrible, which regardeth not persons, nor taketh reward." That is, He doesn't show favoritism. He doesn't take bribes. He doth execute the judgment of the fatherless and the widow, and loveth the stranger, and giving him food and raiment. So God is universal in the application of the law. All of us face the same judgment of our actions before God. Therefore, we as individuals should be impartial too. And then that reflects on the sovereign, the state. We heard earlier that God has appointed them to execute justice within the realm, but they are to do so impartially. And when they do so, they are in tune with that reality which undergirds all reality, the divine justice. They are in harmony with it, and they bring society into harmony with it. And in a way, a figure like Arthur is actually a kind of icon or image of the divine within the country. He makes his realm a little kingdom of God in its own particularity. So this is a really important idea, and it's quite a challenging one. It's certainly there in other traditions, and we'll touch on them in a second. But it goes against human nature in a very strong way, because we want to show favoritism or partiality to our friends and punish our enemies. That's how we're inclined. We want to follow our desires and pursue them, especially these days with this kind of abandon of all self-control and the elevation of fulfilling yourself, pursuing your desires to your own gratification. We want to do that, and if other people get in the way, we want to trample on them to fulfill our desires. But the rule of justice says no. Do the right thing, even if it's not to your advantage, even if it helps your enemy. It's for all people, the rule of justice. And this reflects then the idea of the rule of law. I guess one of the key issues in English history is whether what we call the king's law, so the law determined by the king, is superior to the rule of law. This came to a clash in the English Civil War, or the Wars of Three Kingdoms. Did Charles have the right to change the religious constitution of the Church of Scotland? Did he have the right to impose taxes without the consent of Parliament? Was he above the rule of law? Or rather, did the king have the right to change the law? Now, there's not enough time to go into the full spectrum of the debate, and I'm sure that there'll be people who would disagree with me on this point. But it seems to me a figure like Alfred, a figure like Arthur, embody this idea that they are subservient to the law, for the law comes from the divine, and they are mandated to administer God's law within the realm. They are not above it or superior to it, and they do not define it. They just apply and execute it for the benefit of the common good. This then talks to the character of this king. The ideal king is one who does not pursue his own self-interest. Rather, he pursues the common good and through the administration of justice. We see this in Plato and Aristotle's political theories. For them, they believe that the rulers of the state should be men who do not have their own property. Now, why is that? Why should they not own their own property? Well, in both their views, they think those who own property, those who trade, those who try to accumulate wealth are pursuing ways of life which are primarily self-interested. They're about the accumulation of things for the self. And so they are not primarily directed by seeking the common good. So if these people got in charge, they would turn power towards accumulating power and wealth for themselves. They would pursue their own desires, thereby committing injustice upon the people and thus leading this society astray. This is clear in kind of Plato's 5 regimes that he portrays in the Republic. You have the aristocracy, the philosopher rulers who are absolutely sincere in their devotion to the form of the good. It's not just a kind of intellectual knowledge, but their whole being, they want to serve the good. And so they put the service of the good at the heart of their governance. Whereas most people who are involved in trades and so on pursue their own interests and so are not involved in ruling. But then, things decline. You start getting people introduced into the ruling class who may be still more motivated by serving the general good, but also want more power. And this brings about a timocracy. Scholars have said somewhere like Sparta might be a good example of this. It's militaristic. These figures are filled with vitality. They're trying to accumulate power for themselves, but they believe it's in service of the state as well, of the society. But this then further declines because you start then getting those who are purely motivated by self-interest. This starts with oligarchy, where you have the wealthy who are governing the poor, and they seek to accumulate resources for themselves, stripping assets from those who are unable to withstand their might, using the law to benefit themselves and keep out those who would rise the social ladder. They're not motivated by serving the common good. They're only motivated by serving their own desires. But the flip side is the next regime, because when the poor overthrow the rich, we have what Plato would call democracy, mob rule. And it's fascinating because if you get the chance, have a little read. It sounds very much like today, what he describes. It's a situation where people's desires are just allowed to govern their whole lives. This brings a state of lawlessness because we just take things that we want. We pursue things that we want, regardless of whether they are ours to take. Anarchy ensues as desires fracture the unity of the community. And eventually, a strong man will rise to reimpose order, the tyrant, who is the lowest of the low because he has absolute power, he reinstates order, but he is totally consumed by his lusts, his desires for pleasure and power and wealth, and he will rape it away from the rest of society for himself. You see this cascade from the people who would serve the common good above all else to the ruler who is totally self-interested. The English tradition has the ideal king as he who would serve the nation. We often heard Queen Elizabeth being described as a great servant. She gave her life to the public good and so on. We can debate that as much as we want, but it's interesting that people pick up on that as being a core feature of the ideal monarch. But it's combined, maybe this is where Elizabeth falls down, it's combined with the idea that this service is about administering justice in an impartial way. The good king administers justice and does so because they are absolutely possessed by this idea, by this value above all else, above even their own interest. Arthur very much has that. And Robin Hood also has that, because remember, he robs not to enrich himself, but for the common good, to give to the poor, and so on. Of course, so maybe this is a kind of final point on the character of the king before we get to maybe some kind of concluding thoughts. The king, of course, wields a sword. He is able to use force and violence for the pursuit of the common good. And he does so because his motivations and goals are aligned with God's law. He's protecting people's livelihoods, their liberty, and their property from arbitrary power, from theft, from murder, from corruption, and so on. He wields his sword to restrain such evils, thereby allowing people to live good lives, or at least allowing them to live their lives freely, let's say. That would be a better way to put it. He is unashamed of using the sword for such a purpose. Arthur is never bashful about going to battle with the Saxon horde. He's never afraid of fighting bandits. He'll go when he needs to go. He will take his sword and be the mightiest warrior in the battle. There's a bit in Tennyson's Idylls where Lancelot says to another knight, I am the greatest knight when it comes to tournaments. I am the best at jousting. Nobody's going to defeat me. But Arthur, when he is in battle, he's almost like this demigod. Thunder and lightning are pouring down, and his blows will shatter shield walls. He is ablaze in glory, wiping away his foes with ease. Arthur is a great warrior, and it's only because he's a great warrior that he can administer justice. If he was unwilling to take on in battle those who do iniquity, they would be allowed to continue. That's the great strength of the chivalric tradition, that it brings mighty men, and this is a point made by C.S. Lewis, mighty men have a concern for what's good and true, for those weaker than themselves who can't defend themselves, and put their service to the common good. It strikes me that, amongst other things, one of the things that's wrong today is that when it comes to actually administering justice, the state is terrified of using force. It's unwilling to employ for a just cause violence, essentially. We'll get on to what it does justify it for, but it doesn't seem to use force. It doesn't meet force with force. And ultimately, it seems in a political sphere, the use of force is necessary for bringing a just order into being. Because without it, injustice encroaches, given the fallibility of human beings. So to reiterate some of the key characteristics here, the ideal king of England is chosen by God to administer God's law in a way applicable to England. He does so with impartiality and with force. He brings about a fairness to life, liberty for subjects, regardless of whether they're rich or poor, friend or foe. There is a rule of law and equity before the law within Arthur, the ideal king's reign. And that is what every king is called to. That's what we heard with the coronation of Charles III. And that was the moment that really moved me in the service. I felt my soul on fire listening to those words given by the Archbishop to the king about what he was meant to do, that he is there to bring justice to the land through himself and through his officials, through his institutions, and so on. In many ways, in that regard, then, he is a custodian of a tradition rather than an innovator or a philosopher with a program. He is somebody who maintains what is good and suppresses what is evil. He is a true conservative in that regard. I don't mean a Tory party member. I mean a kind of Roger Scruton conservative in that regard, of upholding good customs and eliminating evil. when it comes into place. He is not self-interested, but puts the interest of the common good before his own. In many ways, he strikes me as a sort of Carlylean hero. Thomas Carlyle's book on heroes and hero worship outlines his great man theory of history. In Carlyle's view, historical change is primarily brought about by magnificent individuals, whether they be politicians, literary writers, or even kind of divine-like beings. They, through force of will, bring an alteration to the society around them. And no doubt they are informed by their context, but it's something about those individuals, their character, that drives huge changes within society. Now, these great men could be motivated by a number of different things. Somebody like Napoleon was a great man, but his motivation was, in Carlyle's framing, some sort of democracy or equitability, egalitarianism. He's not a hero for Carlyle for that reason, because what separates the hero and the great man is motivation. The thing which motivates the hero is an absolute sincerity in their devotion to justice. What Carlyle will call the laws of God or the law of nature. That is, especially in past and present, he'll call that justice. And that this governs all things. In fact, it is the most essential thing in reality. We often are misguided by appearances. We show favor towards those who are wealthy, those who have social status. Those projects that we pursue are in the pursuit of wealth and power. And we think that if we achieve these things, if we build these things up, that we have been successful. But Carlyle says, no, if they are unjust, then they are nothing. They are shallow. They are shams that are going to fall down, because the law of nature is such that injustice, which is against the law of nature, cannot be tolerated for too long. It is unnatural. Nature will rise up and restore itself. It is the way of things. It's almost like if you pull and pull an elastic band, tension grows until eventually it pings back and its original shape is restored. You can't keep pulling forever. It will snap back. And how does this happen? Well, it seems that great men arise, emerge, are brought forth by justice to bring about justice. And so he goes through a number of figures who fit this profile. They all have this absolute sincere devotion to justice in the cultural frame which they understand it to be by. So for somebody like the Prophet Muhammad, that is through devotion to the one God. For Oliver Cromwell, it is devotion to the God of Puritanism, and so on. And these great men, because of their absolute sincerity, inspire loyalty, admiration, love, and worship from others. We see their love for what is just, and we are compelled by it. We feel like we are uplifted with them, and we want to follow them because they become, in a sense, an embodiment, an image of that which they serve. You can see it in any movie where you have a hero and you feel something drawing you that you would want to serve them, you would want to fight for them. The ideal king, a king like King Arthur, is a Carlylean hero. He's absolutely sincere to his duty to God, to administer justice. And within the heart of every Englishman, there is a sense that this is what I'm meant to pledge myself to. Many of us felt it during the coronation or when the Queen died. We felt this sudden instinctive loyalty building up within us. And it wasn't to the individuals at play, it was to the office, it was to the ideal version of them that they were in some sense inhabiting, that the promise is there for them to be. It's when you put it like that, though, there are some interesting implications. One is, and I've already hinted at it, and it could be because of my Protestant leanings and my my views about the civil wars and so on, that a king is measured by the ideal, and the right to kingship is conditional on the fulfillment of that position, of that duty to administer justice, to administer God's law within the nation. The unrighteous king, the wicked king, or we could expand it, the sovereign, whether that be a king, president, parliament, etc., is only rightfully there when they perform that duty. When they don't, they abdicate the right to be the king. The rule of law, because of course the law in this context is divine law applied to a certain political context, comes above them and their self-interest. So when their self-interest gets in the way or violates that and brings about injustice, tyranny, oppression, anarchy, they can be rightfully replaced. This is Carlyle's view, I think. He's not one to say we should stick with the British monarchy because of the institution. As he describes them, are the ideal kings, whether they have that title or not. And King Arthur shares in that tradition. There's a right of overturning the current order if it is unjust by the great man, by the hero. So that's that, and others have commented on this. That's why when you look at somebody like Carlyle, there is a tendency to think of the right-wing position as against change, and especially certain forms of conservatism as being against radical change. But for somebody like Carlyle, if there is injustice widespread within a nation, then those who have that vindication, that absolute devotion to justice, have the right to restore it. And if that means wiping away whole swathes of institutions and politicians and so on, clearing out and bringing back in a renewed form justice, then it must be done. So that's one implication of that idea. A second would be maybe something that addresses what we can do or how we should think about, okay, well, what does this mean for us? Because it's obvious at the moment, as I was illustrating at the beginning of this stream, there is great injustice within Great Britain at this time. Thievery is allowed to go unchecked. People are just running into stores and robbing what they want. At the same time, the state is being tyrannical, oppressing people for things which are not crimes, allowing personal vendettas and personal ideologies and self-interest to be used to dominate how they use power. And we see this with our politicians. I struggle to think of a member of parliament who puts the pursuit of justice at the heart of their politics, of their political program. Indeed, even if we asked them what they thought politics was about, like what the ideal is, I reckon most of them would say something like managing the economy, this economic zone, as Rishi Sunak would call the UK. Or maybe it's some kind of like social improvement, bringing about cooperation with other nations and so on, bringing about egalitarianism. I can't think of a single one who would say justice must be done, and that's why we are in power. Certainly not with the Johnson government or the Tory government, which, despite having a 80-seat majority, has allowed injustice to go unchecked. It's growing by the day. I think this this point though is addressed by Carlyle in a very forthright way, because he's kind of been building this it's been building this case in past and present that we need to return to justice, because that is the way of the universe, the law of nature, the law of God, and it's detrimental to go away from those things because we by nature need to follow them for our own flourishing. But then in the final chapter of part 1, he kind of flips it on its head and he makes a very valuable set of points. And he addresses the famous figure of Bobus Higgins, who many of you will have heard. And I'm going to read at length what he says to this character, Bobus Higgins, because I think it applies to us. You, Bobus Higgins, sausage maker on the great scale, who are raising such a clamour for this aristocracy of talent. We might say the aristocracy of talent is the just or wise ruler. What is it that you do in that big heart of yours, chiefly in the very fact pay reverence to? It is to talent, intrinsic manly worth. Is it to talent, intrinsic manly worth of any kind, you unfortunate Bobus? The manliest man that you saw going in a ragged coat, did you ever reverence him? Did you so much as know that he was a manly man at all, till his coat grew better? Talent? I understand you to be able to worship the fame of talent, the power, cash, celebrity, or other success of talent. But the talent itself is a thing you never saw with eyes. Nay, what is it in yourself that you are proudest of, that you take most pleasure in surveying meditatively in thoughtful moments? Speak now. Is it the bare Bobus stripped of his very name and shirt, and turned loose upon society, that you admire and thank heaven for? Or Bobus with cash accounts and larders dropping fatness, with his respectabilities, warm garnitures, and pony chase, admirable in some measure to certain of the flunky species? Your own degree of worth and talent, is it of infinite value to you, or only of finite? Measurable by the degree of currency and conquest of praise or pudding it has brought to you? Bobus, you are in a vicious circle, rounder than one of your own sausages, and will never vote for or promote any talent except what talent or sham talent has already got itself voted for. More wisdom, indeed, but where to find more wisdom? We have already a collective wisdom after a kind, though class legislation and another thing or two affect it somewhat. On the whole, as they say, like people, like priest, so we may say, like people, like king. The man gets himself appointed and elected who is a blessed to be appointed and elected. What can the incorruptiblest Bobuses elect, if it be not some Bobissimus, should they find such? What is Carlyle saying in this wonderful, striking passage, addressing the common man, or maybe a merchant of some kind, Bobus Higgins, the great sausage maker? His point is thus, that many people will recognize that things are not right, that things need to change, and they instinctively know that we need better leaders. They understand that it isn't some popular revolt which is going to produce this. It's actually an organized minority, an elite group of those who can fix this if they have power. But Carlyle says, well, okay, you say that. You say that we need wise and just rulers. But what is it in your own life which you actually care about? What are the things that you desire and spend your time, your effort, your money in pursuing? He points out that for somebody like Bobus Higgins, it probably isn't justice in his life. He probably doesn't treat people with impartiality. He doesn't care about doing what's right by others. Instead, he'll spend his time in the pursuit of wealth, of status, of material possessions. And when it comes to voting or supporting a certain leader, given his instincts, given how Bobus feels and acts about in relation to the world, is he not going to support somebody who furthers his own interest, his desires, rather than a just ruler? Carlyle's point then is, okay, let's expand this to the whole nation. If most people, or those people which matter, support, want leaders who will allow injustice and partiality for the sake, so that they can have more wealth, more status, more power, then they're going to support that person. They're not going to have the leader that they say they want. The revealed preference is for injustice. The revealed preference is for material gain over a just society. It's a brilliant point, because, and others have said it better than I can, say there was King Arthur and he returned today, or Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings, the righteous king of Gondor, overthrows Sauron and returns and becomes king, or claims the throne for himself, that he's going to bring justice. Would we accept him? Would we follow him? It's a genuine question that each of us needs to seriously contemplate in their heart. Because if no one is there to follow such a person, then they cannot rule. They, as I mentioned before, Arthur cannot administer justice by himself across the country. He needs his knights, his followers who execute his will on his behalf. Carlyle's making that point too. And so, to kind of bring this then to the point which addresses us directly, we may be in a time where there is no obvious king or ideal king in place in any nation. We are in the ruins, as it were. We are in the anarchy and tyranny that faced a figure like Robin Hood, where there is no ideal king. And we ourselves, for Carlyle, are part of the problem, because we reverence, we support, and are loyal to those who are unjust, who perpetuate such tyranny and anarchy. Our desires are part of the problem. And it's only with a change in what we prioritize, a change in what we reverence, what we serve first and foremost in our lives, that change can begin to happen. Because then a group will be formed which will be ready for the hero to return, ready to follow and then to enact their will. It's only when we are, with our hearts and minds, totally devoted to the way of justice, to God's law and the law of nature being implemented in society, to the suppression of iniquity, that such could occur. But before then, it is impossible. We might have revolutions. We could have changes of government. We could get the people we want in. But if we and they have the wrong desires, if we and they have the wrong goals, injustice still reigns. So the challenge put before each of us is to become that sort of person. And it's not something that you can just change overnight. Carlyle frames it as you cannot take a Morrison's pill. A Morrison pill was a kind of pill that was sold in the Victorian era, which the makers said would cure any illness if you just took this pill. Of course, it was a fraudulent scheme. But the promise was, take this pill and you'll be healthy. Carlyle says no. It's going to be an extremely painful process because you're going to have to lose some of those things that you're attached to. You're going to have to fight with your own desires. You're going to have to overcome yourself, turn yourself inside out. It's almost like dying to what you were before and being reborn or resuscitated to a new life, one which is so much bigger and grander than that lived by Bobus Higgins. It's expanding your vision and your feeling to something that's beyond just what's in front of you, beyond your basic instincts, to something which is at the very heart and essence of all there is. That's what Carlyle thinks we need. And that's what may be required if we want the ideal king to be. Arthur needed an army. And the question is, can we be that army for his return? Or can we lay the seeds for an army for his return? So that's what I've got on this topic for the ideal king, the just king, the upholder of justice. I appreciate that this is a kind of whistle-stop tour of a lot of different parts of English legend and history, and drawing, some quite significant influences from Christianity, from the Bible, Thomas Carlyle and Plato and Aristotle. So I can only apologize if I've missed something that you feel is important. But I think it gets to the heart of the matter. The idea of the king in some way expresses the English desire for justice, the rule of law. And thus it gives a kind of concrete focal point for us when we feel that there's injustice around us. It's why we are loyal to it, because it embodies so much more than the individual. So yes, I'll give folks a chance to put any comments or questions in the chat that they'd like me to discuss. In the meantime, let me just say a couple of things about where I've been and what the kind of future looks like for the channel. Because as many of you know, I've kind of been on a hiatus. I've been doing quite a lot of different things, but the main kind of purpose was to, in a way, it was inspired by Carlyle, in part, really getting a sense of what drives me. What do I want to dedicate my life to? I see somebody like Alexander Adams, and I hope he's not too embarrassed by me saying this, but he's somebody who I really look up to, because he has dedicated his life to restoring and renewing the arts in this country. He could have taken a much easier route, but he gave up a lot of opportunities. He's had to live financially at times in a difficult position because he can't necessarily get jobs. He can't get jobs with the institutions which are promoting much of the ideology we see today. But nonetheless, he's fighting for what he believes in with his pen, by producing art, by reviews and so on, seeking truth and goodness and beauty in art. seeking good art, and it's beginning to show some fruition. We had the exhibition, right? And he was a key part of that. But I see somebody like him, and I think, well, I want to be like that for something. And so I think I'm getting closer towards what that might be. And I think in practice, what that will do is mean that I won't be near the channel very often, because what it involves is very in person, in practice, engaging in real life, and I'm quite I'm content with that to an extent because this is something which it feels so real to me now. What it is that I'm going forward to do, but I'll be around now and then. I think streams like this I'll come by and do when I feel particularly motivated. And I have a few videos in the works. I've been trying to experiment with a bit more creativity with my videos, and I think there'll be a couple maybe in the next few months or so on some themes. And yes, I think they will tie more squarely into what I'm driven by. So yes, and I'll talk about that more on another stream because I think it's something which um, I actually had the idea for a stream on the Holy Grail, and we've touched on it a bit, and I want to maybe explore it more deeply there because it is connected. Um, but yes, so that's the kind of future for the stream. I have been on um, Philippocrit's channel, Roots of the Day, talking about storytelling, and it's a bit up in the air, but I may be on with Apostolic Majesty in the near future uh, to talk about a very interesting topic. I can't say too much yet, but it's a good one. It's a good one. But yes, let's have a look and see if there's any questions or comments about the topic. It's good to see so many friends here. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces. It's very heartening, and I'm really grateful that you came along, guys. It means a lot to me. I've missed many of you. Um, yes, yes. I think there's something within many of us which just we're enchanted by the night, and I think it's that combination of absolute sincerity in serving the good and using military prowess to do it, to achieve great feats in that regard, especially against overwhelming odds. So building in that kind of northern heroic spirit idea from the Norse. So I think there's a lot there. Fingal, you're I know you've got Anglo ancestry as well, but no, you don't. Sorry, you don't. But yes, I saw that you were pining for the days of Eric Bloodaxe in Northumbria. Well, as a good Saxon Christian, I pine for the days of King Oswald when he drove out. Oh, what was this face? Um, oh, he was. Was he not the King of Mercia or Wales? Or, let's see. This is testing my Saxon knowledge here. Cadwallon. He drove Cadwallon from Northumbria and restored Christianity. He actually was key to the founding of Lindisfarne, which is called Holy Island around here, because Oswald, he had been exiled for a number of years on the island of Iona, the cradle of Scottish Christianity, and there he met Saint Columba. And when he became king of Northumbria, he asked the monks of Iona to send somebody to help him found Christianity in the region or revitalize it, because Cadwallon was a pagan and he had essentially driven Christianity underground. So they sent Saint Aidan, who became the first major archbishop. Was he the first archbishop? He set up a community on Lindisfarne, which became the kind of center for missionary outwork from there. And some of you might know the name St. Cuthbert. He was a later monk on Lindisfarne. Now, of course, connecting here again, Lindisfarne was one of the first places that the Vikings raided when they reached the British Isles, there and Iona. So it's quite interesting. They targeted settlements of, monastic settlements, which were not very well defended because they were monks, Saxons. At this point, when many of them were Christians, so they would revere these as holy places that were exempt from military conflict. So for the Vikings to attack there, not only was it a great target for them, a lot of wealth, poorly defended, easy to get to by the sea, but it was so shocking to Anglo-Saxons at that time, precisely because of their revered status, their sacred status. So a lot of connections there. Very important part of the world, Northumbria. Good to see you, Burnsy and Scuddy Warrior. Nice to see you all. Ernald the Saxon, I should say. Great name. Let's see. Let's keep going. Oh, Ragplays. Good to see you, sir. Something inherently noble about putting yourself in the service of a just man, to rely and be relied upon. Most definitely. I think of someone like Samwise Gamgee at the service of Frodo Baggins, and there's a real power in his courage and obedience to serving Frodo, even if he disagrees with Frodo's decisions, such as trusting Gollum or going to Cirith Ungol rather than through the Black Gate. His absolute devotion, that's what he's called to do, show absolute devotion. And it drives him to the most amazing, great feats. He becomes this, he becomes a force of nature as a in the service of Master Frodo. It's quite powerful. Oh, good to see you, reactionary reading lore. I shall take this on board, Scuddy Warrior. The content is always the primary thing. I guess I just wanted to do a little bit more creatively. I have this idea because I've managed to work out how I can record my video gameplay and use it for video work. And I have this idea for using footage from Skyrim with a voiceover. And I think it will be really cool and illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. So we'll see. Maybe there'll be some Skyrim gameplay underneath my vocal commentary. We'll see. God's Own Prototype, Maximus, Lollius. Great to see you both. Interesting. Called Sanctus Music for Lindisfarne. Sympathetic, really, but it was the beginning of a glorious period in Norwegian history. Yes, it was. It was, and I mean, the Kingdom of Northumbria was, under the Vikings. It was a powerful thing, and there was a lot of, I actually think the Vikings is often the term is misleading, isn't it? Because Viking just means pirate, right? Pirate, raider. But there's so much more to Norse culture than the Vikings. So the Norse Empire, as it were, the Norse kingdoms in the British Isles produced great beauty, great craftsmanship, and so on. So I think there's so much more to it than, oh, we was raided by the Scandies. And of course, the Saxons themselves. Like, Tom Shippey makes this very compelling point that many of the early Saxons were Vikings, as it were, because they're Germanic tribes / Scandinavian, who start out as raiders and pirates, which are, contributes to Britain leaving the Roman Empire. So, there's a continuity there between the Norse and the Saxons, as it were. Yes, I was too. I think it's a really powerful thing because it goes beyond just political allegiance or who you vote for. It's elevating your field of horizon to the more essential things, the things behind mere appearances. And we got to take part in that as a people, which is rare in the modern world. So, yeah, definitely. I agree with you there, Bernsey. And this idea of the oath or the vow, which is binding for life. In a transactional society where we think of things in terms of exchange, and we think of our promises in that regard, we've totally lost that, especially with the culture of narcissism, where it's all about me, my advancement, my career, my self-fulfillment, my identity, and so on. There is this very much this culture of I am the pinnacle of my reality. I am the center of my reality, and all things must serve me as best as possible. Where something like this just flips that on its head, and is the antithesis of that attitude in the modern world. I think my stream's just about to end as well. Hello, but it's good to see you, and Aaron's always doing great stuff. So it's worth checking out after this potentially for folks. How often do I think about the Roman Empire? I was actually thinking about this the other day. I don't think I think about the Roman Empire that much. It's I think about the Lord of the Rings and medieval a lot, as this stream might have indicated. I think that's in part because of my Christian faith, and also my roots in England and Scotland. So it's something which has a deep connection to who I am and where I come from. The Roman Empire obviously had a huge influence upon Britain, and it's amazing piece of history studying the Roman Empire, but it's not something which preoccupies my thought in the way that I know it does other people. I am also really interested in the Neolithic era as well. That really captured my imagination when I went to Orkney. And if you get the chance, I'd recommend, I did an article on it. I think it's in the community tab. So check it out if you're interested, because I find that period of history so compelling, because you're kind of at the primordial roots of who we are and our society. The one thing I do think about, though, with the Roman Empire, and is very connected to Saxons, and they had this sense quite strongly, more than the Romans. But the fragility of things, of social orders, of powerful orders, is very tempting to see the Roman Empire as like one continuous monolith, almost maybe like a long-term British Empire, although even that wasn't continuous in the way it's easy to think about. But there was periods where there was anarchy and lawlessness. Was it the 2nd century, 3rd century, where it split into 3 empires? And then, it collapsed. It collapsed in a very severe way. Britain left before the rest of it collapsed because it already basically the infrastructure, the protection against Saxon raiders and so on had fallen away completely. And overnight, when they left, okay, the currency, there was an injection of currency in the short term, but very soon, many cities were abandoned. There was a decline in skills, in people's ability to produce certain technologies like stone walls. People returned to a more subsistence-based style of life in general. All of that which had been, a lot of it disappeared, and it came to an end. And this despite the great kind of spirit of Rome, of the eternal city, of that which will go on forever. It didn't come to last. I think about that a lot. It's quite it's a harsh truth which we need to remember today. I think our leaders think, they're nothing like as glorious as Rome in many ways, but they think that their empire will last forever. And no empire has lasted forever. And even the great empire of Rome fell. And very quickly it disappeared once it fell. So I think it's that's what I think about with Rome. There's so many other things though. It's such a compelling time period. I think that's why something like Gladiator was such a success. Great question, Bernsey. Good to see you, Chandler Holmes, and thank you again for the wonderful intro video. I always love it. It brings a smile to my face every time I see the visuals and hear the music. That's very true. Many Saxons did join the Guard, and were involved in kind of serving the Byzantine emperors for quite a long time. They were great warriors in that regard. Yes, and well, this is a good note to finish on. So, thank you, my friends, for joining. Please think about what I've said, because ultimately this isn't meant to be just an intellectual exercise. We were dealing with topics where it's about the soul of the nation and how we fit into that. So I pray and I ask, please confront yourself. What do you prioritize? What do you revere? What kind of king would you serve? Till next time, may God bless you, whoever you are, wherever you are. Bye for now.
Receive this kingly sword. May it be to you and to all who witness these things a sign and symbol not of judgment, but of justice, not of might, but of mercy. With this sword, do justice, stop the growth of iniquity, protect the holy church of God and all people of good will, help and defend widows and orphans, restore the things that are gone to decay, maintain the things that are restored, punish and reform what is amiss, and confirm what is in good order, that doing these things you may be glorious in all virtue, and so faithfully serve our Lord Jesus Christ in this life, that you may reign forever with him in the life which is to come. Amen.